Hello, my name is Laura or Laura Durban. I'm originally from Germany in the Black Forest area, so South Germany, close to France, and I live in Glastonbury in the UK. And I will tell you today about the true history and mystery of the Grail myths, as well as the path to sovereignty in our modern lives. And I won't go into detail into all the stories, that are connected to the Grail. So I'll give you the most important one, which is the origin story of the Grail quests. And that's also the most forgotten, unfortunately, most forgotten story. But if you want to dive deeper into these legends and myths, as well as their mythopoetic meaning and importance for our modern day life, and the the connection to our Western spirituality, especially if you're from Central Europe or the Celtic Isles, then please find me on Substack with my newsletter Sovereign with Laura Durban, where I write weekly about all things sovereignty, the other world, as well as bridging this world with the other world, the Western indigenous nature spirituality, and the priestess path of Avalon. So, as I said, I'm originally from Germany, and so for all those that are not born in the UK or have ancestries either in Ireland, UK, Scotland, Wales, or Europe, like Germany, France, Spain, you are so welcome here, because we tend to think that these Grail myths originate in England or Wales or the Celtic Isles, which in their modern written form, in terms of like the medieval times of the written form, yes, they do. They've been written by English scribes, but the actual tradition that is the foundation of these stories is much older, and you will hear a lot about it today. And when you think about it, our heritage before Christianity made us forget and disconnect ourselves from nature and our origin and our Western indigenous spiritual roots. Our ancestors were part of those tribes, like the Celtic tribes, the Germanic tribes, that would travel up to the Celtic Isles. So before they even reached the Celtic Isles, Britain, Scotland, Ireland, they were in Central Europe. So, and also if you have ancestry further away, like we all on this world have a common theme, and it's a matriarchal history that I want to bring back through my writing and my teachings, but not to now start a new age of matriarchy. I think that we had, and then we had the patriarchy taking over, which unfortunately really it harmed and exploited the feminine and therefore nature and the woman. But what the way forward is to bring our strengths together. So, and to remember our matriarchal and matrilineal history and ancestry, and then recognize and also accept and acknowledge where we are today in our patriarchy, and how we can fuse our strength when we really come into our sovereignty, into our fullness of being, with both the feminine and masculine aspects, and create a new world. Create a world of interdependence, of reciprocity, of regeneration. So if you want to find me on Substack, Sovereign with Laura Durban, or on Instagram, where you find a bit more about my personal life as well, I am you can find me under @mythopoetic_alchemy. But I'll send you links and such together with that replay. And most of you are already on my Substack anyway, so hi, thank you for joining and watching the replay. I'm also more than happy for feedback and for questions. If at any point you feel like you want to dive deeper or want to get some more clarity, please do note it down and send me an email, and I'm more than happy to record another workshop or write another newsletter about it. So we will first Oh, my notes, I already said them all. So I will now start the share. So I've created a little presentation. You don't have to read it. You literally can just sit back and then listen, do your dishes, or be in the car driving, just listen to my voice. It's not like you have to pay attention to the screen much, but if you're on the screen, I did prepare a little presentation with some images to just illustrate and get you into the atmosphere of the Grail myths. So let me share this with you. So there we go. And there we start with the Grail of Avalon. So I named it the Grail of Avalon because Avalon is part of the other world, and we know Avalon through the Arthurian legends, and that's also part of my education. So I studied the Arthurian legends in my literature study, and it is so much more than that though. So these stories are mainly written down in like the 12th, 13th centuries, but they do also have a foundation or like a big inspiration point in the 9th century Welsh stories that have been also written down as the Mabinogi. But we have also then Irish mythology that goes into, that kind of overlaps a lot with the other world. It just has different names over in Ireland, but we have very important common themes, and some of them I will touch on today. And you might have all heard from King Arthur and his round table, his knights of the round table, and how they have been hunting for the Holy Grail. So when we just think about those stories that have been told to us or we have read as children, like the classic knight tales. Well, these are there's so many of those, and there's amazing details in them. But the funny thing is, what we often don't know is that there's a spiritual tradition and almost like a map for our personal development in those stories and in those legends. And the Holy Grail is a specific important object that promises regeneration and rebirth and a new life, peace on earth, and all these good things that we all want, overflow, of abundance and joy and thriving nature. So it soon became the object to go for, and the main thing to strive for. So, and I want to link this to the personal development today, because we all strive for something. But first, we need to know what it is, and what is it really an object, or what does it represent? Also, we know it as a vessel, so what does it contain? And how do we use it? And of course, well, how do you find it in the first place? So for this, I will tell you a short story. Again, if you want the full story and more of the mythopoetic meaning, please go to my Substack, Sovereign with Laura Durbin, and find the elucidation of the Faery Accord. I will link that with the replay as well, so you can listen to that if you really want to dive in. So, but briefly, what happened is, before King Arthur was around, like way, way, way before, there exists, is almost like a creation story, a Western indigenous creation story, that it begins with the paradise on earth, basically. So you might all remember this time somewhere in the fibers of your being, this time where the land was thriving, this time where all beings were interconnected and living in harmony and reciprocity. So as humans were living in harmony with nature and the creatures of nature, as well as this world was in contact with the other world. There wasn't this strict separation or this rational mind boxing in of what is what. we were woven together with the shining ones, the she, the fair people underneath the hills. And this was the time when the voices of the wells were singing. And we knew of the guardians of those otherworldly portals as the Well Maidens. And these Well Maidens would make sure that every wanderer would never have to go hungry. So whenever someone was lost in the woods or on a long, long journey or quest, they would only have to find a sacred fairy hill or a well, a spring, a source of water, and ask for the generosity of the Well Maidens by paying them respect. And because they are so generous and so welcoming, they would come forth and would serve on in golden cups and on silver platters all the food and drink that one could only desire. And if one didn't like what they served, they would bring something else. So there was this free sharing of otherworldly food and nourishing food. And I have this beautiful image here, which I think illustrates so well that feeling of overflowing nature, of the sacred springs and wells that were flowing forth. You can see the cup that was giving out that refreshing, life-giving water. So in this time, everyone was in peace and was taken care of. But what happened is, unfortunately, that didn't last long, because there was one king, and he was greedy. He was not rightfully appointed by the Lady of Sovereignty, the goddess, the feminine, the embodiment of nature. He took the power to himself. So that was when the breaking of the Faery Accord, which lasted until then, started. He would come out and he would go to the wells and ask for the maiden to serve him food and drink, and he would take her against her will and made her serve only himself in his castle. And this is what his knights did after him as the same. Of course, their leader, even though not a good one, would set an example, and they would follow. So soon after, all the maidens of the wells were either abducted, harmed, assaulted, raped, or exiled. Some of them made it back, though, to their home, to the other worlds, but closed the portals. And since then, we have no clear access point as we used to anymore between this world and the other world. It's become trickier to access because there was no trust in us anymore. And the rivers ran dry, the trees were barren, the plants would rot away. And this was the case for years and years, until King Arthur became rightful king, and he heard of this wasteland, and he knew he had to restore it to its former bounty, because as a true king, he knew he was only rightfully one if he made sure that his land and his people would be thriving. Not like the greedy king who just wanted everything for himself. That is not a rightful king. A true king makes sure that everyone is taken care of and restores the sovereignty of land and people. He's not there to rule over. He's there to care, support, protect. And so he would send out his knights to find the answer and to find the well maidens, or find clues of how to restore the land. And soon after, they did find a bard who was able to tell him about the legend of the Faery Accord and of its breaking. And he said, if you desire to restore the land, you have to find the Cord of Joy, which is the cord of the rich fisher king who was wounded. And this is an otherworldly cord. Yeah, this is a realm of the part of the other world, and there you will find the Grail procession. And once you have found the Cord of Joy and the Grail, the nature will be restored back to its glory. But what about the well maidens? He asked. Well, you said, see me and those other strange folk that you found in the woods. We are the descendants of the well maidens and their assaulters. And we have to take our own reins over our own life. We have to, there is no prophecy for us. We have to make our own life and fulfill our purpose in which way or shape we choose to. So in my belief, my personal belief is that we are all these descendants of both the perpetrator and the hero and the victim. So when we think about the trauma triangle, that's a really important picture to have in mind, that we are all of it. Yeah, and we contain the colonizer within us as well as the indigenous ancestry. We have both within us, and this is important because only when we recognize this and can integrate this, the good and the bad ancestors, so to say, as well as the good and the bad within us, the greedy parts as well as the generous parts, that's when we can truly become sovereign and step into our full power, and step out of shame and hiding. So this started the Grail quest for King Arthur and his knights. So here on this image you see, in this painting, you see the knights of King Arthur riding out and their ladies bidding them farewell and, you know, wishing them their best for the quest, because it is the masculine who has to go out to find the Grail. And this is another beautiful clue that we often forget, is that you know, we hear about all these knights' tales and things like, oh, why can't there be a feminine knight, you know? And because, yeah, women can be warriors. There's plenty of stories about female warriors, don't worry, it all exists. But in this specific case, where it's about the restoration and regeneration and reclaiming of the feminine, of the land, of nature, that's a big part for the man to do. So, but we as women have to support them, because the women in those quests give the man the clue. So it's often that, like one of the first Grail knights, originally Peredur in the Welsh Mabinogi, and then later known as Parsifal, he's quite foolish and a bit naive, and he doesn't really succeed at the first time, and you know, he's on his proper hero's journey and needs to learn lots of lessons. And it's the women in the story that first tell him off for failing first time round, and then also giving him clues how to succeed. So it's the women that help him move through the quests, because obviously the women need to remember their power in themselves and need to remember that it's their feminine strength and wisdom. And once we do that in our modern day life, yeah, we can then help the man to go on this quest to also reclaim it for us all. So we need to work together. Okay, so what happens though? So they go out on the quest for the Grail. The funny thing is then, through the medieval tales, the Grail becomes more and more an object. So here we come into the question of what is the Grail? What even is it, right? And in those tales, we have this vessel, we have this cup, usually a golden cup. Again, if you've seen Indiana Jones, it's this golden cup with jewels on it, and that's also what was described in the medieval, later medieval Grail quests. And it's interesting because it's becoming so objectified that suddenly they're all hunting after a specific object, which is often very precious. And yes, it is precious, but not in the way of monetary value. That's what we forgot. And it's a sign of that we actually entered capitalism. So already the value is given more onto the object itself rather than its symbolism, its content, or the work that needs to be done to maintain it or to reclaim it. And this is a very important part, because as soon as we think that an object is more important than life itself or restoring nature, that's the goal. Is not to get the object. The goal is to restore nature. The object is part of the quest. And it is a metaphor. So that's why we want to explore now what it represents. And originally in the first Grail quest, which I mentioned, which is Peridor, we have not a cup or a vessel, we have a platter. And what was served on that platter I will come to later. But for now, let's explore all the different symbols of the Grail. So before it was a cup, it was a platter, a serving dish. And really also in the Mabinogi and other stories, we also hear about a cauldron that Arthur, back then, a hero and not necessarily a king yet, and his fellow knights and warriors wanted to, were hunting after into the other world, and that was a cauldron that was kindled, or its fire was kindled by the 9 maidens. And here again we have the idea of maidens of the other world. And in the Grail's tales we have 3 cauldrons. We have the cauldron, they are all important, and they're also part of the mystery. We have the cauldron of inspiration and prophecy of wisdom, which is Ceridwen's cauldron, the great sorceress. She's also an initiatrix of men, and this is important because we need the inspiration or the foresight of the wisdom as well of how to change the world. And the second cauldron is the cauldron of plenty, that which serves food, but not to anyone. And here we have, again, like similar to the Well Maidens, the cauldron that serves food and nourishment and drinks. But it doesn't serve that to everyone. So how the Well Maidens would really originally only serve to those that respected them, the cauldron of plenty would only serve food and nourishment to the courageous, never to a coward. So to take on this quest, we need to be courageous. And courage comes from cœur, the French word for heart. So it's not only about being brave and, headstrong and willpower and I'm fighting through this, but also fighting for the rightful thing, the pure thing that comes out of the heart. And the third cauldron is the cauldron of rebirth, that which gives new life. And here we also have a wonderful, and that's why I named it the Grail of Avalon, a wonderful link to the 9 priestesses of Avalon. So we have the 9 priestesses of Avalon are those that live on the island, the otherworldly island that we nowadays know as Avalon. Is part of the otherworldly realms of Annwn. And this is an island of death and rebirth. So again, this is an important part because at the end of his life, King Arthur has been sent to Avalon to be healed by Morgan the Fae, and the Fae meaning the fairy. So she's obviously a fairy woman, and again she's living on Avalon as a queen with her sisters, so we have this theme of the fairy women again. And in the end, you know, that ties us back to the Well Maidens as well, because on Avalon it's a fortunate isle. It's like a paradisical isle. It's full of fruit growing all year round. It's got sacred fresh waters, so it's almost as this is part of how it used to be when we were all connected. So we have this link there also again to the voices of the wells, or the Well Maidens, and these nine women. And here again, the importance of women and the number 9, the feminine power to come together. I'm not going to go into much more details. That again, you find it on my Substack as the under the sisterhoods in the ninefold. If you want to dive into the topic, it's a really beautiful one. But now we go further back into other symbols of the Grail. So what we also have is here again, I just want to point out the importance of the feminine as the womb of the feminine, actually the mother goddess. Yeah, the Grail being a symbol, a representation that is actually not an object, but it is the living and breathing womb of a woman that grows new life, that can create a life. Well, if that is not a symbol of rebirth, and as the embodiment of nature, the woman is the embodiment of nature, so the womb of creation also then is to be found, you know, in the great oceans. And again, this theme of water, when you think about, we are living now in the wasteland, in the exploited nature, this is where the great oceans, the womb of the mother, is polluted. It's not thriving anymore. That this is also part of our task to restore her back to life, to honor her again, and also to honor the sacred blood of women, and to reclaim that as a woman nowadays we've been conditioned to feel shame and fear and guilt around our menstruation. Like, most of us tried to hide it, felt embarrassed if we had blood-stained trousers, versus actually reclaiming this as a very sacred and important time in our lives, and also part of our magic. And the same is with the, you know, with the nature of reclaiming the purity of the destruction, the creation, and the healing cycles of nature. It's always changing and always flowing, such as us. So this is another part, a very important part of today's time to reclaim our sovereignty. And here again, I want to point out that also the knights, our men, can help by giving their women the permission to bleed, to take rest on their bleed, to ask how they feel, and maybe even track, you know, their week. So when a woman, you know, we know this nowadays as PMS, if she's like super annoyed before a bleed starts, instead of thinking, oh, and, you know, rolling our eyes, oh, she's at that phase in her life again, it's more so getting curious and being like, wait, what has happened in the last weeks leading up to this period in her life that might have stressed her, or that there might be emotions that she suppressed? Because that's the reason why we get annoyed. Versus when we start to actually be able to voice and hear the voices of the well, we need to reclaim our voices again and start honestly speaking, and therefore have knights in shining armor, right? That chivalrous men that listen to us, that make us feel safe so we can share our voices. Well, then we often don't have to be annoyed or angry in these times. But if we are, it's also important to again voice it. And here in this beautiful image, it's the accolade. Oh, can't use this word anyway. It's like it's a beautiful representation of a motif in literature, and it's the representation of it's a painting of a woman of a queen that is knighting the man. And this is an amazing way of looking of how it's originally originally the interdependence happened between men and women. So the man, in order to rise up, needs to be challenged and initiated and helped, supported by the woman, and then only she can appoint him or anoint him as the rightful ruler. And also she can take that away from him if he's not fulfilling his tasks or keeping up his promises. And so, but also she needs him as a source of protection, of support, of the seed of creation. We need each other. Okay, so here there's just a lovely painting that reminds us how important it is for us all to remember our part in it all, and that not one is more important than the other. We all work together. So now the second question is, what is in the Grail? So now we've heard a few of the vessels, we heard from the cup and from the platter, and we heard from the cauldron, and we heard from the womb and from the earth and her oceans itself. So with the earth and the ocean, we know kind of what's in that. What's in the Grail is everything we need for life. All beings, all insects and mycelium networks and plants and spirits and creatures, animals, humans, that's all our world, as well as the other worlds and the other realms. And it also contains all our nourishment. Here again we have the parallel to being given the nourishment and all the medicines we need. The true medicines, what we nowadays know as alternative medicine, alternative healing, plants basically, is the original medicine. Like, how do you think pharmaceuticals are created? By extracting things out of plants, basically, yeah? So the original medicine is in the land, is in nature, and to reclaim that is very much important, because that is our true food. And here also to practical, again, being very practical nowadays life, look at what's coming onto your plate. When you go through the supermarket, check the ingredients. Is it actual food? Is it whole food, or is it like proper, like processed, GMO modified, No, not food, chemicals. What are you putting into your sacred vessel? And that's something we often forget, but that's a very important practical way of reclaiming the Grail as well, to make sure we buy from the farmers markets, or we go to we have our own garden, maybe grow our veg. That'd be ideal, right? But make sure that where we get our food, it's actual food. It actually comes from the earth, because only then it can give us nutrients. And even when you take supplements or medicine, like pharmaceuticals, what we often forget is that when we extract something, we don't get the whole benefit. There's a reason why nature created the plants and beings as she did. They always have different compounds that work together. So when you extract something from a plant, it doesn't work as good, because it needs, maybe when you think about when you take vitamin C, it's much better to take vitamin C in the form of an orange, because the orange also contains fiber that then helps you metabolize the sugars in the orange. And it's a whole experience, wholesome, holistic experience. And yeah, coming back to that as well, the holiness of life. And then, so moving further ahead again, so we went all the way down to kind of matriarchal times, where the goddess was honored, where land was honored. To then let's move back again, or forward again, to Augustan times, because I didn't even touch upon the interpretation of the Grail as the cup that Jesus used as in the Last Supper, or the cup that Joseph of Arimathea apparently brought over to Glastonbury, filled with his blood or his sweat. So that another legend tells he buried here under the Chalice Hill, where also close to where he built the first church of Europe. So this is an interesting one, because here we have the content of the Grail being the blood, and that had many believe that, oh, maybe the Grail that Joseph of Arimathea brought from Jesus is actually not a cup with his blood, but he brought back Mary Magdalene, the woman, the representation of the land, right, with her womb and womb blood, with her womb filled with the child that was conceived by her and Jesus. And after his death, apparently he helped her escape because she was no longer respected, although we know from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that has been found in recent times that she has been, she's a successor. She should have continued his legacy and his teachings, but some of the apostles didn't respect a woman to do this job, and then obviously they made her out to be a prostitute, when originally she was a very wealthy priestess, and someone that Jesus consciously chose as his sacred union, as his equal eye-to-eye partner. So she had as many teachings as him. It was not all him, and everyone else followed him. No, she was part. She also helped him learn loads of things. So here we have a wonderful painting of Mary Magdalene that is from the St. Margaret's Chapel in Glastonbury, and we have another representation of the Grail in her hands, and that is the myrrhophore. Myrrhophore is a bottle containing very expensive essential oils, and so we know that Mary Magdalene was asked by Jesus to anoint him with spikenard oil. And spikenard oil, it used to be, like every essential oil, 2,000 years from now ago, used to be super expensive. So him asking her means it was clear he knew that she had that oil. And her having and possessing this oil means she must have been filthy rich. And again, as a priestess, back in the days, you were really highly respected and often had a good position, and maybe also had come from a high noble household, which you must have in some way, shape, or form. So here we have another content of the Grail, which is the oil, essential oils that was used to anoint. And when do we anoint? Anointing would happen, anointing as a king, so that was one specific way when there was this new phase in life, but also for death. And she would anoint him, or she would use that spikenard oil on him before his death, and it was as if he knew that he would transition. And that is interesting because we know obviously of Morgan Le Fay helping Arthur transition or heal him or help him into the next world on his rebirth, and that makes Morgan Le Fay a death doula, a psychopomp. And so Mary Magdalene kind of continues that legacy in the Christian times as a psychopomp, or someone that helps transition someone from one life to the next. And when we think about the Celtic definition of death, it was way different to the Christian definition of death, or our modern day interpretation of death. It wasn't the end of life, it was the next phase of life. It was as honored as birth and not suppressed. And then we have, so then the next, when we go back to the cauldron, the content in the cauldron, we have the elixir of inspiration, as I already touched on, that those 3 drops, the first 3 drops, would give you that insight of poetry, of prophecy. But the rest of the elixir would be poisonous and toxic. So only the first 3 drops should be consumed. Then the cauldron of rebirth, that's where that warriors would have to go into the big cauldron to then emerge reborn. However, they couldn't speak anymore, so it was not a proper, it's not necessarily the kind of rebirth you necessarily want. And then we have the cauldron of plenty that gives lots of food, and that brings me also to another vessel of sovereignty, and the Grail, or as the horn, the vessel of mead that is filled with mead. So mead, we know as a sacred otherworldly drink. Who knows? It might have been spiked with some psilocybin mushrooms back then as well, because sometimes we hear that it brings you to the other world and makes you think, were they really that drunk with mead, or was the mead so strong? Or was there maybe something else in it that made druids see other realms? We don't know. Well, might be worth a try. So, like, in other cultures, like Egyptian cultures, alcohol was mixed with blue lotus, similar kind of effects. And so that would be the content of the Grail, as in the mead. And also the mead is made out of honey, and honey obviously is brought to us by bees, and bees, tracing back even further to the Greek mythology and tradition, are symbols of priestesses that are in devotion to the goddess. So again, we have the mead and honey symbolizing the goddess, and it was always a woman, a female character, that would give out the mead to the next rightful king. Very important. And here we have a beautiful painting of the Tuatha De Danann, the Irish legendary heroes that carry the 4 Grail Hallows. And we see especially the person right in front to the left is carrying that cup, that Grail. The other Hallows are the tree, the wand, the sword, and the stone, as you know from tarot, most likely. And so I'm bringing them in because what I just shared with you, that sovereignty goddess, or the lady of sovereignty who gives out the mead to the next rightful king, is an Irish myth and motive. But again, it's all connected. They all kind of work together and just give us clues about a much, much older ancient tradition that have existed in so many parts of the world. And that also brings me to the stone, the other Grail Hallow, because as I said before it became a cup, in the Christian tales, the Grail was a platter, or sometimes a stone or serving dish. So what was on that stone? What was on the platter? If it wasn't, liquid or food, it was actually a head, believe it or not, because Peredur, the template guy for Percival, the first Grail Knight, he found the Grail Castle and the wounded Fisher King. And when he asked why was there a platter with the cut off head on it, the Fisher King said, "This is the head of my son, which the 9 witches cut off." Now, the 9 witches, obviously made out to be really bad in that tale originally, are the 9 priestesses, as we've already touched upon before, who raised Peredur. And they knew of his origin because he didn't know his father or mother. And it turns out that the wounded Fisher King, he had a son, right? But that son was not the rightful heir, because when the king is wounded, and also he was wounded on the thigh, which means he was infertile, means he can't be a rightful king. That, because if he's not fertile, if he's not strong enough, the lady of sovereignty, or the embodiment of the land, won't choose him. And further back, his heir wouldn't be rightful anyway because he had a sister. And his sister's son, after matrilineage tradition and heritage, would be the rightful heir. And who was the sister's son? Of course, Peredur. So the 9 witches told him through this quite cruel, quite cruel gesture, that he actually was under matrilineage, right, the next king. And this is interesting because obviously in those stories that have been written down by Christian monks and scribes, they would have not wanted to reveal that information. So they made the priestesses or the sorceress or women to be out as bad witches, that cut off and, killed a man, and it was all horrible and all really weird and confusing because they had to distort the original story because we were already living in patriarchy, so they didn't want anyone to know that matriarchy was our origin. So this content of the Grail is actually the truth. This is the symbol, this head is the symbol of what was really true, what was the origin of all things, the origin of matriarchy. And then after this, the Christian scribes took over, the medieval scribes and storytellers, and when then King Arthur and his tales became also popular, we had loads of different variations of the Grail. The Grail became this jeweled golden cup, and we hear in the myths when the knights, first it was Percival, then it was in the European Arthurian tales, and then it was Galahad. And when they found the Grey Castle, the Grail was shining. And it was only served by the Grail Maiden. So again, even though now we have very much changed and even distorted stories, the Grail is still being served by a woman. So even that wasn't changed. Even that patriarchy couldn't completely rot out. So the woman was often depicted as shining herself, which in the painting here by Gabriele Rossetti on the left, we see the dove behind her, which is obviously a sign for Christ as well, and kind of ties back into that kind of purity aspect of what was expected from women. But let me give you insight to a secret that most don't know, is that when in those myths, in the Arthurian legends, a woman is shining, that means, or an object is shining, that means that they are from the other world. That means that they have fairy origin, or more like elven origin, or actually, and this, the origin of the whole fairy tradition is actually divine origin. But when we only had to believe in one god, all the other goddesses, the matriarchal goddesses that existed, the multifaceted divinities, they had to move, right? And they would have been changed in the stories, and either to very bad sorceresses and evil witches, as we heard before, or to pure maidens, kind of like Mother Mary, all innocent, or to kind of little pixie creatures in the Victorian times. But all these are actually traces of the goddess, of Mother Goddess. So, and here we go, the truth of the Grail myths. And another practical insight to the Grail and the content of the Grail, again we're tying it back to the beginning, is the Grail Maidens, right? And remember that the Grail Maidens would give out food and drink. So now when we think about it and think about how important pure water is in our contemporary time, the simple content of the Grail being water is super crucial, because the rising rate of infertility in the Western world is mad when you think about our better hygienic standards, and medical intervention, let me call it. And still we have less, we are richer, we have more things, material things, yet there's a rising rate in infertility. Why is that? What do you think? I mean, yes, there's a disconnection to nature and we are more stressed, but also our tap water, which is mainly our drinking water, is polluted, is filled with hormones and with microplastics. So really, it's so crucial that we find pure water sources again, springs we can drink from, and they come where? Out of nature. But if we keep polluting nature and the waters, we also keep polluting ourselves. So we need to remember our interconnectedness with nature. We need to remember that we are part of nature, that we are nature ourselves. So it's not so much even about us protecting nature. I don't believe that. Nature is a powerful force. Nature can send earthquakes and tsunamis and tidal waves, and she will if she's threatened. So it's really more so about recognizing we need to protect ourselves. And society keeps us in a false safety. So, which is created by dependency on the external, dependency on institutions or insurance or political systems, when really all these stories tell us that we need to come back into our sovereignty, and we reclaim sovereignty by respecting the interdependence between human and nature, between men and women. So this is my share for today. I've already went a bit over time. If you want to know more about what sovereignty really means and that relationship, again, find me on Substack, Sovereign with Laura Durbin, send me an email. I've got a few articles already ready for that topic. And if you want to know, if you want personal guidance and really tackle more of the myth and more of the the magical workings, but also the practical inner work and personal development alongside to the reconnection of our outer world, then you might want to join me on my year-long journey of the worlds of Avalon, which is a quest, a personal quest for men and women, by the way. It is this journey is for all, as you might have guessed by now. It's important for everyone to recognize the goddess. We need the man to go on their quest for the goddess, and we need the women to help remember the goddess within themselves, so that we can support our men, and so they can support us. And it's really a quest through the mists of illusion and conditioning, because we've all been conditioned our whole life to forget our power. And to integrate that into our life and to make those choices. Sometimes also we are not able to live in full sovereignty because there are dependencies on our external life. But as long as we are aware of them, we get to choose which ones we want to have. You know, for example, in which country to live, which compromises to make. So this is a year-long journey which I invite you to, which you can start anytime, but especially now in the season of Samhain, of November, December, this is the time into the dark, into the underworld, where we go into our subconscious, and where we explore the realm of the sea. This is the sea, obviously, so it's based on the Celtic 3 realms, and the realm of the sea is the realm of the past, the ancestry, the depth, the subconscious. As Jung said, Jungian psychology, he often used the image of the ocean as a subconscious. And that's what we will explore. We will take journeys in realms, trance journeys, meditations, but also very practical shadow work exercises and meet our guides, so that we can then, in the springtime, enter the realm of the land, where we really go outward again with nature, right? So nature first draws the energy within, makes sure that the soil is nourished and active, and the seeds can grow roots, and then it's got all the power and energy transformed to then rise above the earth, above ground, and bloom. And that's what we will then do as well, and be able to explore our relationships and our environment, and how we can use our magical practices and inner work to really infuse our lives and our day-to-day as well. So it's always very practical. And then we move into the realm of sky, which is the sky is the future and the higher self, and also the sacred leadership. And I love to explore with you sacred leadership and sovereignty for your own life. Also, if you want to lead and facilitate spaces with other people, maybe you already do that, and that then is a very crucial journey to first go within yourself, then explore the immediate surrounding, like family, friends, work life, and then go further and then go into the bigger group and the public if you wish, and step really onto your Grail quest. Yes, so you find all the whole schedule on my website, lauradurbin.com, on the Worlds of Avalon. And if you have more questions to the Grail myths, to sovereignty, to the interdependence between men and women, please don't hesitate reaching out to me. It was a pleasure of mine, it's a passion of mine as well to talk about this, and I hope I could illuminate some new neural pathways and spark some inspiration, some motivation to really enchant your life and to make a change, because that's the aim, is that you find your own power and magic to go forth and bring that into your life and to make a change, because we deserve a world where we thrive in and not only survive in. All the best to you. Bye for now.